morning. Welcome to the Gray Foundation Memorial Lecture. Delighted that you can join us this morning, and really delighted that we have Iain Thomas with us. It's my privilege to introduce him. I'm not going to go through his full CV and bio. He's on the chair, so please do have a look at it. One thing, when I met him earlier, I asked him if he was a boarder, and he looked rather quizzically and said, no. I said, well, then you must have had a lot of boarding house friends. And he said, yes, I did. I said, well, clearly, this whole new concept of artificial intelligence is the rage of the day. But the reality is it was discovered many, many years ago in the Grey boarding house. Intelligence was virtually impossible to find, and any semblance of it was artificial. But I think this topic right now is something that is either putting fear and trepidation into the hearts and minds of people, because what will this do to our future? Will there be good actors, bad actors that are exploiting us? Will I lose my job? And on the other side, there's massive excitement and anticipation of what it can do for you. And I think Iain's background and expertise as an author, artist, involved in technology puts him perfectly placed to speak on this topic. And we're very honored to have him all the way from New York, a good, simple, humble grey boy from the epicenter of the universe. Iain, welcome back.
I could have gotten ChatGPT to write a speech. Enough jokes were made about it by literally every old boy who I spoke to. Using a ChatGPT. And I realized my name is spelled I-A-I. So it's right there. There's a degree of serendipity involved with what I'm doing, I guess. But it would have been pretty meaningless if I hadn't, because it would have been the AI's point of view on AI. It would have been a speech about my life from the point of view of the machine. So it would have lacked complete meaning. It would have sounded probably nice, probably relatively poetic. And I'm sure the teachers will say that they've seen orals that were generated in 10 seconds that sounded okay but were devoid of meaning. And I think that's one of the things that we all have to deal with this technology, is kind of figuring out where to use it and how. I think that's something everyone's working out. I was saying earlier, it reminds me a lot of the era from my year where the internet was becoming a really big thing in the mid to late 90s. And it was a similar kind of technological evolution, and there was a similar kind of anxiety, to be honest with you. There are a lot of people who were saying, what should I study? Should I study that? So, yes, it's an interesting space. I have a point of view on what the best things to do are in terms of if you have a child who's studying, if you are in a business. I'm not going to go too crazy into it, but I'll definitely speak to it. That was a complete tangent to what I actually meant to start saying, so I'll start reading from my speech now. So, I haven't been back since the 10-year reunion, and I was quite sensitive about my hairline at the time. But I am overcome with joy at the 25-year reunion to see that things are much more well-adjusted and fair. The max of my fellow Greys. My parents are both passed on. So this is the only place I have left that can really be proud of me. That's not something I thought I'd ever say, but when both your parents are gone, you've got to ask yourself who you've got left to impress. It's you guys. It's the building and the people who've walked in over decades. And it seems strange, no other connection that makes sense to me. During the pandemic, I watched Iain.S Thomas play guitar on my computer screen after cancelling my immigration plans, after my daughter's school shut down for good. There in the middle of the apocalypse was my old English teacher playing guitar, and for the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of connection. And while I don't know if I've ever been a good grade boy, let alone a great grade boy, you will not find my name in gold lettering on any of the boards in these halls. I was here, and I was with many of you while I was here. So these years are important. And to explain why, from my perspective at least, why these years are important, I need to start with a brief word about car surfing. So, sometime in 1996, my brother and fellow Gray decided about 7 a.m. we needed to drop off a friend who needed to lift home. There was no room in the car, and me being the younger brother, I always wanted to go with. So I said, it's fine, I'll go on the roof of the car. This was something we'd done before, because we were young, TikTok did not exist, and our brains were yet fully developed. Those of you who have spent time on top of the 1995 model Opel Corsa will know that there is surprisingly little on the roof to hang on to. So the trick to car surfing is knowing where you're going, so you really have to brace yourself for the corners. I knew where we were going. We were going to drop my brother's friend and fellow Gray off at home, and so we approached the four-way stop that kind of separates Mill Park and Lakeside, and I was braced for him to go straight, because like I said, I knew where we were going. He in fact turned right. So this is the car, and this is me. This is still the car, and this is still me over there. And it really is true what you see in movies when you're about to die, everything slows down. And I remember as I arced through the air and anticipated my trajectory, I made eye contact with the woman who had stopped at the four-way stop. And that moment seemed to last so long I felt like I could have waved at her. I of course didn't. I hit the asphalt and immediately skidded across the road, doing myself considerable damage. I think I told my mom I fell off my skateboard, and how she believed me, I have no idea. I think that was the story she wanted to believe. So the story is related to my purpose here today, because the angle at which you're flung from a moving vehicle and the way you're flung out into the world really matter. And that's what the few years that we spend here do. They determine the angle at which you're shot out into the universe. Your parents, your friends, your teachers, and this building and the buildings like it will conspire together to determine your trajectory as you arc through life. I don't think I can look at any other period of my life with the amount of vivid clarity I have for these years, because this place and the people I spend time here with have determined so much of that angle at which I left and flew through the air, the angle at which I've returned now. So in that spirit, I wanted to share some things I've done since I've left, in the hope that maybe you'll look at what I've made, what I've done, not as boastful or as self-centered, but as a way for me to say, I have gone further because of our relationship and the bond that forms the basis of this community. Here are a few things I wanted to talk about. There's a lot that I'm not going to talk about because I don't want to waste time. I'm a creative director for Coca-Cola. I do a lot of really cool, crazy, innovative kind of stuff for them. If this plays, you can kind of get an overview of it. they're limited edition products where we just do absolutely insane stuff. We make Cokes that are dream flavored. It says dream flavored on the side of the can, not cherry, apricot, or mango. Dream flavored. We have ones that are pixel flavored. We get to work with incredible video game companies like Epic Games. We literally launched this one inside a game of Fortnite. And we get to just collaborate with all these different incredible people, talents, and, whether it's Marshmallow, and for this audience I'll say that's a DJ, a musician, Fortnite, a video game, Tomorrowland, a festival, or anything else. It's loads of fun. We get to come up with new flavors of Coca-Cola, which is honestly like some of the most fun you can possibly have. 2 weeks ago I was at Coachella in California, and I am way too old to be at Coachella in California. It's the biggest music festival in the world. We built out a 360-degree virtual stage experience with a virtual pop star. So that character's name is Iain.S Online. She only exists on Instagram. She only exists on TikTok. She has no physical presence whatsoever. We created a virtual stage for her to perform at Coachella. It had about 10,000 people coming through the experience over the course of the festival. And I've done this for numerous different brands over the years. For Levi's, we used to tell people that the jeans were really flexible, or that they had copper in them. For Johnny Walker, this is a monument. It has a never-ending sentence that runs around the outside of it, so the sentence has no beginning and no end. You literally have to keep walking around the entirety of the monument in order to understand it. Nike, and I've written a whole bunch of books over the years as well. Intentional Distance is a science fiction book. Who You Were Before You Were You is a story about explaining this idea of being connected to a child. It's effectively a way to talk about where we come from. And I like to make things. This is the book with every word you cannot say. It's effectively one long conversation dealing with depression that kind of becomes an artwork as it goes through the book. This is one I was going to start to talk a little bit more about. This is probably my most famous book called I Wrote This For You. This is a picture of Harry Styles. For the audience, that's a singer. This is the British government, who you've heard of before. This is them writing me a thank you letter for allowing them to use one of my poems in memorial with Prince of Wales and the Duchess of Cornwall. That's a Kardashian. Quoting me, that's people getting tattoos of my stuff. This guy on the left wrote a book called Fight Club. That's him choking me out at a signing table in New York, because that's his thing. That's what he does. That's his little, unique thing to the world. That's Steven Spielberg quoting me to Tom Hanks and Oprah Winfrey. And this was quite a funny thing where I got into a fight with Leanne Rimes, also a singer, on social media. She miscredited a poem of mine. She said that a writer called Kurt Vonnegut wrote it, and I said, no, I wrote it. And then she sent me a screenshot of the poem with Kurt Vonnegut's name on it. And so I sent her this meme that says, don't believe everything you read on the internet, just because there's a picture of a quote next to it. Abraham Lincoln. And that got us into the Daily Mail of all things. But it's really worth talking about how I got to this point of that book specifically. Jeremy Bayless, the old teacher here, had a particular interest in me and recognized in something in me, some kind of spark. I wasn't sure many did. And he would tell us stories as we painted in our art class, many of which I can recite as if I heard them yesterday. And for me at least, he was this kind, gentle soul, and he took me aside at one point to teach me how a method he had for remembering different dates and numbers, when different things happened, because he knew, and it's still true to this day, I'm terrible with numbers. I left school, I thanked him for his time and went off. I studied and started a career in advertising. At some point I discovered I was pretty good at it. And I won awards, and I got paid handsomely. And a few years later I came back to feed as my folks. I was driving around my brand new car with its fancy leather interior when I thought I should drive through the school just to make sure everything was still there, which I think is something all great boys are wanting to do, just to check and make sure the school was where they left it. Everything was where I'd left it blanket, but I parked just to make sure, which is when I saw Mr. Bates walking back to his car, which was very different to my car. The doors were different colors, it was rusted, and had very clearly seen better days. I stopped him and spoke to him, and he remembered who I was, and we spoke, and he told me how he was doing, and I told him how I was doing, and we connected. He was worried about retiring, I remember, and I said goodbye to him. I felt just this weight of injustice of the world in a very real way. I was immersed in my career, and a career in advertising, specifically the creative aspect of it, is a very narcissistic career. It's about what accounts are you working on, what awards have you won, and which agency do you work at. And so, literally in that moment, walking away from him, back towards my car, I made a decision that I would make something that was about everyone else but me. And I would call it I Wrote This For You. I had never written a book before, but it made sense and it felt like the right thing to do. So I just started publishing as a blog with a friend in Japan who would send me photos, and I would write these short aphorisms or stories, or as people like to call them, poems, about you. And eventually, because there's a lot to talk about, I don't want to spend all of our time here, Harry Styles, Kim Kardashian, etc., etc., etc. These interactions with Mr. Bayless contributed significantly to the trajectory that led me here, as did something Neil Thompson said to me, just once in English class with him. I read The Dying of the Light by Iain.S Thomas, and he told me it reminded him of a recording of Iain.S Thomas reading himself. And I've never forgotten that comment. And whether I'm on the stage at the Strand Bookstore, or on TV, or on a podcast, I remember those words and know deep down that I can read a poem really well, just because of that one comment. So everything over these years, no matter how small, contributes to that angle I was saying to Mr. Andrews earlier on, like just a brief conversation we had in Standard 4.2 or whatever, I remember, and it stays with me. So, making that book taught me a huge lesson as well, which is you don't need permission to do great things, and this is what I was saying to the boys this morning as well. You can't just make things, which I think we all forget. You can just start a business, you can write a book, you can write a poem, you can act, you can paint. And I think we go through life in kind of a default mode. We think we have to either be asked or we have to seek permission. And that's kind of what I spent my life doing. Is when the pandemic broke out, I struggled to explain to my kids what was happening, and figured many parents were too. So I wrote a book over about 48 hours called Where Did Everybody Go? And within 72 hours, it was translated into 5 languages and downloaded nearly 100,000 times. And this pattern of observing the world and then reacting to it is something I find myself doing again and again. Something happens, and to deal with it, I make something. This is a book called 25 Love Poems with NSA that I wrote when the Edward Snowden leak happened. So in the Edward Snowden leaks, there's a list of words that if you use them in combination in an email to someone, the NSA will flag your email account. So I created an entire collection of poetry using nothing but those words, and then sent it out as a free PDF, which makes going through customs always interesting. Someone was waiting for to call me out. When the war in the Ukraine broke out, I was working where I am now at the Vice Media Group, and ordinary day-to-day I work in Poland. But when the war broke out, I sat down with my creative partner, Martin, for 20 minutes. And we just said, what can we do? Like, with all that we know about all this technology, all these different things, what can we do? And we had one idea. And we found a bunch of companies, and they fell in love with the idea. And this short video tells the story about it.
И творчество этого, если в злодеях снова by whom to wipe out.
Moscow is incredibly concerned, of course, and we're holding a special session. And there is great fear that Russia will try to send a weapon out.
We grew up with them. We will not allow anyone to take this away from us. This is our culture.
It was really one of the most incredible projects I've ever worked on in my entire life. The degree of emotion when if I present this and there are Ukrainian people in the room is absolutely profound. I remember when we started getting scans back, people were scanning statues, they were scanning monuments, they were scanning buildings to try and preserve them. But then people started scanning burnt out tanks and craters in the road and what their apartment looked like after an artillery strike. And how do you document a war changes a war? You know, if you look at the way that Vietnam was documented, World War I, World War II, and so this is the first war to be documented in 3D, which kind of blows my mind in a way. The other really profound thing about it was that so people would scan those, and then they would scan silly things. They would scan cupcakes. And then somebody explained to us that it was Easter in Ukraine, and they gave each other cupcakes. And so to try and keep that little moment, they would scan the cupcake. And then kids would scan the parks where they play. The guy scans the sleeping wife. So, incredibly profound, very honored. Like I said, I've won a million awards for it, and I've dedicated every single one to the people. My mom passed away during the pandemic, and I had this really traumatic experience where she was in Cape Town, and my aunt and grandmother, she was in Pretoria and I was in Cape Town, and my aunt and grandmother were worried about COVID, and none of us were allowed to travel, if you can remember that period of time. Over the phone, it became very clear that these were the last days of her life. So, ashamedly, I forged travel papers and tried to drive for 16 hours to be just outside the house. About halfway there, my aunt phoned me and told me that she passed. So I turned around and drove back. When I got back, I had to explain what had happened to my daughter, who was 5 at the time. And I don't know if I did a good job. She was traumatized by it. A few months after that, I was working with an AI copywriting startup called CopyScript. They did basic copywriting using what's called a large language model. And if you've used ChatGPT, this is the technology behind that. I was using a model called GPT-3. And I was prompting it and showing it how to write headlines, or how to write body copy. And I was fascinated by it. And I realized that you could show examples of different things and ask it to come up with new things based on those examples. So one very late night, I sat down and I showed it a passage from the Bible. I showed it a passage from the Talmud. I showed it a poem by Rumi, some lyrics from Leonard Cohen, just different things that inspired a sense of awe in me. And then I asked it, how do I explain death to my children? And it said, encourage them to celebrate the lives of other people. Tell them that the dead are not dead, not in the way we think of it. Tell them they live on as they are remembered. Tell them every goodbye is really a hello to a different way of being. Tell them they are loved and will always be loved. Tell them they never have to feel alone. Never. Tell them the world is magical and mysterious and strange. Tell them they are part of the mystery and the magic and the beauty. And that poem became the kind of starting place for this book of what makes us human, which was effectively my conversations with this AI model thing. How do we overcome great challenges? What do we do about pain? What does it mean, in terms of being mortal? And so I started off this talk saying that, like, if I just got in touch should I hurry up? Is that what it is? If I got it to write my speech, it would be pretty meaningless. AI is a tool. If you have a creative use for that tool, the end result is creative. If you're just using it to do, something else, then it's not really that useful. Another thing that I'll share very quickly, this is an art project I did called Fragments of Sappho. So Sappho is this poetess that lived 2,000 years ago, and we still consider her one of the greatest poets to have ever lived. That is despite the fact that most of the poetry is lost. It only exists as fragments, tiny little sentences. And in fact, only 2 complete poems of hers still exist. And what I did is I showed the AI the 2 complete poems, and then showed it the fragments, one by one, and said, how should the rest of this go? And so it recreated poems from 2,000 years ago. Whether they're accurate or not, I don't know. It's not just the exercise. But it was a way to kind of use AI in a kind of archaeological sense, which was really interesting. Wait. There we go. So obviously several people have said to me there is a lot of discussion around AI and fear and anxiety, and I think we'd be fools not to feel those things. The world is going to change dramatically. I think it's really, really difficult to prepare right now. I'm wondering how best to prepare your kids through. I spend my time working with this technology around with OpenAI and other companies, reading reports, and this is what I believe is a reasonable college. For me, one of the things is to embrace a radical differentiation. The world values scarcity more than it values talent. You can still be an accountant, you can still be a lawyer, and tools like GPT-4 and so on will make your job incredibly easy. But you should find a unique point of differentiation. Find a niche that you can own and specialize in it. And that requires a degree of creativity and not only learning to paint, just being in touch with what your individual creativity that you bring to your profession or business looks like. I also think embracing the unexpected, particularly from the point of view of people looking at different careers and different jobs. There is a principle in life. If you want to be beautiful, you will always worry about being ugly. If you want money, you will always worry about being poor. You kind of need to transcend the way we traditionally looked at jobs and look at it with new eyes, not through the eyes of what the job has always looked like. There's a very real potential that your soft skills, your ability to be human and empathic might be your biggest strength. Or working with your hands. Or something else, something that you probably look down on for a very long time. Anything and everything is possible. And then lastly, I would advise young people to pick a direction, not necessarily a career. There is a statistic that phones ring. We stop talking just for 1 second. There's a very good good chance that 65% of people, or kids in elementary school, will work in jobs that don't actually exist. I don't think you can or you should choose a specific career, but you can choose a direction. I'm going to present this with a fair degree of survivorship bias because the school clearly asks a very specific kind of person back here to speak. But my own experience is all I have to go on, so that's what I can speak to. When I say you can choose a direction, I mean you can look at the things that you're good at, the things that you love, and the things that make you money, and find the path on which they intersect. I did not set out to be a poet. The first time I published a book as a poet, I kind of looked at them and said, what do you mean? An author or an artist or a creative director. All I know is that I've always wanted to make things that move people. Sometimes to make them cry, other times to sell a Nando's burger or a Coca-Cola. So whether it's a poem or a Nando's burger or backing up Ukraine's cultural artifacts or whatever, they all come back to this desire to make and create. And you might not have that, or your kids might not have that. They might have a desire to lead. And whether they lead a Boy Scout troop, a church service, or a Fortune 500 company, I don't think it really matters. It'll be okay. You'll have your tools around you and the way that you're going. Maybe you like to organize. Maybe you like to listen. I can tell you some of the many, many scary stories that I've heard about what the future might look like, but a way to navigate around that is to look at what makes you and make peace with that. I find it very crazy that one of the most scary things in it right now is the idea that we might have to work less. I'm here because this is a little bit like time travel for me. I get to come back and speak to the boys and speak to you, and while I cannot, due to prior commitments, be as persistent in the student's life as my old art teacher would, I can be here now to agree to that angle at which they go out into the world. Wherever you go or they go, I hope you find success. I hope someone sees something in you and remembers you arc through the air of life to wave. So, I think that everyone is creative, and I think everyone is creative in different ways. My wife is a film editor, and she has what I call destructive creativity, and not just because she trashes the place, not joking, she has it. But what happens is when she edits a film, someone gives her a whole bunch of footage, just miles and miles of it, and she cuts that down into a very concise, unique story. I have creativity that's completely the opposite. Like, I just make stuff. My room is chaos. It looks like a wizard's lair in terms of all my paint and my I know incredibly creative business people. I know quite dodgy creative accountants as well. And I think that everyone does have that creativity, and I think it's about tapping into that in a very real way. I think creativity is I think it's probably the #1 skill that people will need. And I'm not talking about painting. I'm not talking about playing the guitar. I'm not talking about craft. I'm talking about bringing creativity to your business, to your profession, and bringing that the energy to creativity with it. So from my point of view, I think, yes, I do think everyone is creative, and you can develop that more the more you tap into. It's like a muscle. Sure.
Marry ChatGPT and creativity.
Sure.
Very little that I know about chat. And it does all the thinking for you.
So it does very predictable thinking. So the way that large language models, which is the very fancy technical term for ChatGPT, GPT, all these different technologies work, is that they predict language. So if I say to you, how are you? There's a pretty good chance you understand this is on a much bigger level. So if I said, what should I do today if these are the different tasks that I have to do, and what order should I do them in, and please send an email based on that, the machine can look at what the most predictable language, the most predictable series of sentences would come after that question. And the key word is predictable. One of the worst insults you can make to a piece of writing right now is say it looks like an AI wrote it. So AI writing is incredibly predictable. It is the most lowest common denominator kind of writing you can get. You can use it creatively. Like I did in my book, I gave it very creative, very inspiring kinds of inputs and said, write something more like this. And then I worked with it creatively to get somewhere that was interesting. But if I just went and I wrote my speech, it would be meaningless, it would be predictable, it would be boring. AI is a great way to do a lot of boring work very fast. And if you've got boring work to do, then that's great. You know? So it's about picking your battles and where you want to use it. If you want to use it to draft an email, that's great, that's fine. Would I write another entire book with it? I don't know, maybe not. I would have to find a different, very creative use case. If that makes sense.
AI is part of it also evolving like Facebook, turning metaverse,
Sure.
a whole bigger picture out there. At what point do we start risk losing what is real and what is?
I think that's a very valid fear. I'm moderating a panel on AI in Paris City in about a week from now. And so I've had to meet a bunch of the panelists, and I've spoken to them, and at least two of them have said specifically around AI, one of the biggest worries is the loss of objective reality, which is just knowing what is real and what isn't real. I don't worry about it in the virtual reality sense, where someone's going to be in a video game, they can't tell the difference between the screen and real life. I worry about it much more, that someone you're following on Facebook or a Twitter account could just be an AI, a bot, generating, complete garbage and misinformation. And I think in the same way that we adapted to the internet and knowing that there were risks involved with it, we're going to be learning those hard lessons as we go forward. And I think it's a symptom of a much bigger thing. We've already started going through it with what you can call the decentralization of media. 2/3 of Gen Z and the majority of millennials would choose TikTok over all other forms of streaming media. So that experience that some of us had growing up when The Simpsons was on the Thursday night, we spoke about it on a Friday morning, everyone watched the same movie and saw the same thing, spoke about it, doesn't really exist anymore. And so when generative artificial intelligence, which can make video now, it can do all sorts of crazy things, it needs that I think is something that we're going to have to navigate as we go through it. But it is anxiety-inducing. I'm not here to be, my goal is not to be reassuring. My goal is to go from my point of view, where I said, this is what I'm worried about, this is what I'm hoping for. Anyone else? Sure.
And we watched Dallas the next week.
We did, I remember. If you Google backup Ukraine, it'll take you to a giant page of all the different scams of the things that people in Ukraine are scamming. So just Google that, it'll come up. Cool.
Working knowledge of using like AI system like image generation and stuff versus being aware of it. Like with everyone's getting ahead of the game and use it sooner or later or just being aware now.
I would say you should probably use it. That's what I said. And the reason why ChatGPT is the fastest growing consumer app in history, I think it was 10 million users in 2 months or something crazy like that, is because it's ridiculously easy to use. And I think like that's the thing. If you never used it once, you understand it. You can literally ask for whatever you want in plain English. You can go, sort out this teaching schedule, or draft this email for me and make it sound like this. And you're literally just asking for things in natural language. And that's why it's become as big as it has so quickly. And so I think knowing how to use it is probably a good thing. A very popular saying right now, and certainly I'm moving is that AI is going to take your job, but someone using AI might. Because the AI is not great on its own. It needs someone like you. Yeah.
I was reading hard for the study on the AI. It's just to say, it's fine.
I'd have to read the article, but ChatGPT specifically is owned by a company called OpenAI, which is owned by Microsoft. Microsoft is embedding that technology in Microsoft Office. So I'm pretty sure you'll be able to use a Word document, and that same technology will be in there. ChatGPT right now, at least, is completely free. There are also 2 or 3 or 4 other competing large language models that do the exact same thing. So there's Lambda from Google, Bard from Google, Lambda from somewhere else, Claude from Anthropic AI. They all do the same thing. They're all just technologies where you can go, write me a poem that in the style of a pirate shanty about chocolate, and it will do that for you. So I don't see that particular risk case being something to be too concerned about. I'd have to read the article.
To make a comparison between how the internet is so freely available,
yeah.
ChatGPT and so and so.
Yeah, if you Google ChatGPT, you can literally go right there, click try ChatGPT, create a user account, and you can use it straight away. It's completely free. Cool. Anyone else? I think he's not under. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Iain, thank you very much for that. I mentioned to you earlier that there's been a family connection with your dad, and I know how proud he would have been of you, and he had a profound influence in my wife's life. I also want to say that we as the Grey are very proud of you, and you have become a great Grey. So thank you very much. I'm going to hand you over to Ting Stradham and Rulo Ntonjana to give you a vote of thanks.
I wrote this verse of thanks for you. ChatGPT made this rhyme. Your words are a gift you generously share, and we're grateful for them and your time. You taught us of your journey and how the school played a part in you finding your voice and the expressions of your heart. Thank you for sharing with us your story and your dreams. You've shown us that the future is not always as it seems. You've advised us to stay grounded in a world that's always new. To ask, where to from here? And for that, we say thank you.